I'm Rosie Hardy. It's Q&A time again. Gosh, they come round quickly, don't they? It's great to have so many questions from you all. Let's get on with it. I have 3 fuchsia plants in the ground. I'm in USDA Zone 9. My 2 trailing fuchsias bloomed profusely this year, but my upright Gartermeister fuchsia did not produce a single bloom. Beautifully last year, all plants same flower bed, same waters, light, fertiliser. Gartermeister might be getting a bit more light by the hour. They face east, no afternoon sun. Can you explain why Mr. Gartermeister did not flower? Thank you for the opportunity to ask this question. It's absolutely fine. This is unusual. Normally, if they have flowered one year and they were quite happy in that position, absolutely no problem. They should flower again. They are a fuchsia that does like to be in the shade, so maybe because it's just getting a little bit more light, that may be one thing. Also, it is a slightly later to come into bloom than the others, so you may get a little bit of later season. I don't know what your season has been like, but if your other fuchsias have been working perfectly well and doing what they should be and flowering beautifully, then there shouldn't be a specific problem. I would suggest that you do give it a little bit of a high potash feed. That will hopefully help. But the other thing is that maybe you need to do a little bit more pruning of it in the spring when it's starting to come into growth, and maybe that will just encourage it to come into a bit more flower. That's as much advice as I can give you, I'm afraid. Hello Rosie, I'm in the northwest of England on the sheltered coast. I've noticed one of my autumn joy has large, smooth, slightly iridescent brown patches on the leaves. My research leads me to believe it may be too wet and part shaded, but I'm still unsure. Should I cut it back now, sacrifice the flowers for this year, or just leave well alone till spring when I will move it? Thank you. Okay, so autumn joy, she means Hylotelephium or sedum, and when we have had so much wet weather both through the spring and then in the middle of the summer, then they do tend to suffer from these horrible brown patches on the foliage. To be honest, I would actually cut off everything and get it down to ground level, clear away any of the diseased or damaged leaves, because if you put it through the stress of going into flower, you won't get good growth at the base. So personally, I would cut it back, and yes, because you're in that area, lift it in the spring, move it to a slightly sunnier, slightly drier location if that is possible. Okay, hi Rosie, first love your channel. The propagation classes were awesome. I'm trying now annual verbena and heliotrope. My question is, okay, before I get on to the question, let's talk about the propagation course. We have had a lot of really good reviews from people. Thank you very much. If you do want to look at the propagation course, there is a link below. We are explaining propagation of herbaceous perennials. Every way that you can go through and reproduce a herbaceous perennial is what we have covered. So we do not cover any grafting, we do not cover any budding. Those sort of things are not something that as a herbaceous grower I would actually consider doing. But the one thing we have found is one of our clever people has found out how to be able to buy the course for someone else to gift it. So this is something that you might want to look at as a birthday present or a Christmas present, as it's the time of year when we start thinking about that. And we will also let you know how to do that in the link below. Okay, let's get on to the question. I have a large view deck 3 feet above the new garden I'm trying to create. It was a dead lawn, weeds. 90% of the time the garden will be seen from above. Any tips and tricks when the garden vantage is below you? Zone AB 9A near Seattle. So you're in a similar situation to the most of the UK. We're zone 8, 9 here in the UK. So that is absolutely fine. You've got a very good climate there. The one thing when you are sitting high and looking down on a garden is that you want to be able to see beautiful round clumps, and to create these individual round tussock type clumps you need to use a lot of ground cover, so that the ground cover shows off the bigger clumps which have their lovely flowers. And you need to get plants which have good colour and tend to be slightly more upright with maybe slightly flatter flowers occasionally, because if you're looking down and you see a big round daisy, it's much more visible from the top than say a spike or something that's elegant. I'm not saying don't use those, because you're going to be walking through and you need the softness as well. But make sure that you put in a good amount of ground cover plants to show off the really big showy plants. That's my advice to you. Hello Rosie, I'm in the US and have zone 7B. Zone 7B is, I've just had somebody else ask me about that. So that is about minus 12 degrees centigrade at night time. Sorry, I don't do Fahrenheit myself. So for me thinking about it, so it gets quite cold. You also probably get very warm summers. And you have got a pond and you want to put accent grasses along it, but it's primarily clay soil, and you want to answer the perennial to put in dry conditions that sometimes turns soggy when the clay dries out, which can survive some negative freezing winters. Also a fast growing perennial to act as a tall barrier for a near dusty gravel road. Okay, to stop all the dust entering in the pond. I fully understand it. Let's start with that one, which is probably a slightly more difficult answer, because obviously if you're putting a herbaceous in there, you don't get any protection from it during the winter months, but that may not be a problem because it'll be wetter then anyway. My thought there was you want something relatively fast growing, relatively tall, and I would go for something like a Runcus dioicus, which I know you can grow, and it would be really good in there because it will like the wet to start off with, and then it doesn't mind when it dries out. So that's my first suggestion, a Runcus dioicus. And then for plants to accentuate and to go with grasses along the edge, a stilby is my first choice. And then primulas, the candelabra primulas, are always really good around a pond edge. So that would be my advice there. My sister has a lovely blue, tall, dainty flower up the stem with a broad leaf clump at the base. We can't find out what it is. Can you recommend a good UK plant identifier, please? We would love to find out what it is. From that description, I have absolutely no idea whether it's a daisy flower, whether it's a pointed flower, how many petals it has. When you're asking for a description, you've got to either have a good photograph of the flower, the leaf, the whole plant as a structure, with perhaps a tape measure next to it so people know how tall it is. That's my first thing for when you're asking these questions, because it's much, much easier from a photograph. So on Facebook, there is a group called Plant ID, and you may be able to get help from them. And as I say, you need to give the complete thing. You could try your Google Lens, or if you've got an Apple, the plant identification on there. They all do help you. If they don't give you a correct answer, they give you an information, so that you sort of can find out at least the genus and then maybe the species, and then you can go further on. But photographs of flower, leaf and the whole plant with an idea of the size of the flowers, the leaf, etc. So using a ruler, centimeters or inches, is really key, because it can look huge in a photograph and yet only be 1 centimeter big. So that is something when you're taking the photographs, please. Planted 4 to 5 Salvia amistad in a group about 8 years ago, survived all our winters that would throw them, so in northern Surrey, Greater London, so in the UK. This year they broke through really late, about 5 weeks ago, and are now only about 15 inches tall. Are they in terminal decline, or is this down to climatic conditions? So this probably is a combination of both. You know, 8 years for an amistad is really good going, and I think you've done incredibly well to be able to keep them going all that time. You must be quite nicely protected. I would say a plant like that, once it's getting into the 9th and 10th year, will be starting to die back, and it will be the natural senescence and time for it to finish. However, this winter has not been conducive for things like that to come through. It was so wet, so cold, light levels were so poor that they haven't actually thought, oh gosh, it's actually summer, and they are a late summer into autumn flowering perennial anyway. So if they're coming up through now, hopefully you will get some flower and we don't get too many frosts too early, and you will get some beauty from them. But I think it is time to start thinking about replacing. I have summer fruiting raspberries. I've cut down brown canes. The new growth for next year's raspberries are very tall, over 7 foot. Can I chop a bit off, or will that stop the raspberry production for next year? If your raspberries canes are getting that tall, that is fine. If you've got them against wires and you're training them against wires, then just train them horizontally along the top wires. Or do them in a fan shape up the wires and keep them growing and keep all of that space. Otherwise, if you don't have them trained in that way and they are free standing, you do really need to reduce some of that top growth. So I don't know which way of training you've got, but if you've got the wires, then just extend them along it. If you haven't, then yes, reduce the growth, and no, it shouldn't cause too much problems because they will branch from lower down. Hi Rosie, please can you give me some information on the bright red trailing bedding begonias? Wow, they've been beautiful. I want to overwinter the ones I've got. Can I propagate them for next year? Most of these begonias come from tubers, so you can certainly keep the containers somewhere dry and in the shade. So basically let them get a bit of frost, lose all that top growth, dry them out, put them in a shed or in the back of the greenhouse. Do not water them over the winter. Then in around about beginning of February, round about the beginning of March to the end of March, you can bring them out, as long as it's not frosty then. And just, when I mean bring them out, you can bring them out of the shed and put them into a greenhouse. At that time you can repot them. You will be able to split some of the tubers up, repot them, put them into a greenhouse and start slowly watering them to get them rehydrated. Wait until the frosts have gone before you then put them out in the garden. Hi Rosie, I really like your down-to-earth advice. Can you advise me how to get Regal and unique Pelargoniums to flower? I garden in southeast England, so heat shouldn't be a problem. I pot into John Innes number 2 with lots of grit. Could it be a watering regime? No problem with the ivy-leafed geraniums, by the way. Sorry, ivy-leafed Pelargoniums. See, even I fall into that trap of calling Pelargoniums geraniums every now and again. Okay, so this is probably two things. An overwatering and overfeeding will stop those two varieties from actually flowering. So your watering regime may be at fault. They want little and often, but they don't want to be too waterlogged. So that is another thing. Now, although you may be in the southeast of England and you're saying the light is not a problem or the heat is not a problem, light levels this year have been a problem. We have had a little bit of bright light and then a lot of very low light, and that hasn't helped Pelargoniums to flower brilliantly. The ivy leaves are much more floriferous in their nature anyway, whereas the uniques and the royals are not. So you need to have them in the brightest position you possibly can. Do not overwater them, and I think that will be a lot more helpful for you. If that's not helping, try a little bit of pruning and just give them a little bit of a nudge, and that also might help. Love your channel. Have plants in the ground in pots in Zone 5, Northern Illinois. I have Pearl Glam Calicarpa in pots. They were babies but really performed well. The flowers seem to dry out. Any thoughts? Thank you. So the Calicarpa Pearl Glam is one with a beautiful dark leaf. It then has these lovely creamy white flowers, and then in the autumn you get the most amazing clumps of iridescent purple berries all the way up the stems. Some people love them, some people don't, but for autumn berry effect they are really, really fantastic plants. Now there are two things here with these. It depends on what you've got them potted into, because they are actually something that likes an acid or a slightly acid compost or ground to grow in. So that's the first thing I would say. Just double check that you aren't making them too alkaline in whatever you're giving them. And it could also, it sounds, if the flowers are going brown, that you have got a moisture problem there. and it can happen quite quickly. You won't realise that they're drying out, and you water them and they can go over very, very quickly. So make sure that they get enough moisture, and it isn't just giving them a big soak. I think you'll find it much better if you can do a watering regime where you make sure they're watered in the morning and they're watered in the evening, so that they have enough to keep them going all the time. I hope that helps you. Hello Rosie, I have a dilemma. South facing garden in Weston-super-Mare, so that's down on the coast in the UK. I have just bought a small Acer in a 3-litre pot. It's only over a foot tall. I'm not sure if I've put it in the garden or a pot and let it grow a bit bigger. I've already have a large Acer that's grown beautifully, also a smaller red one in my garden. But because this is a little one, I'm not sure what's best to do. Can you help? My soil is free draining. Well, it sounds as though your garden is already very, very good at growing the Acers. And the one thing that you need to know when you're putting in something like a tree from a container is the smaller it is going into the garden, the better it will take. If you keep on just potting it up in a container, you can get to a stage where they do become a little bit too root bound in that container, and therefore putting out into the ground and letting them get their roots away is far better. Because if you're container growing Acers, you have to continually keep repotting them. They need to be repotted very regularly. So I would say go for it, get it in the ground. That's absolutely where it wants to be. Make sure you've got sandy soil, you say. Make sure you put in a good amount of garden compost, organic matter. Dig a little bit bigger hole than you think. So if it's in a 3-litre container, which is roughly sort of about a foot across, make the hole that you're putting in at least 18 inches across. Dig over, mix in lots of really lovely garden compost, put it in the ground, let it get established. The soil is warm at the moment. This is a great planting time for putting in everything. It's lovely, moist, warm soil. Plants will get away really well. Thank you for your channel. Please feel free to edit if you answer. I'm in Germany, zone 7B. So as I said, 7B is about -12, but knowing where you are, you get very hot in the summer. So you've got a south-facing bed which needs some editing. It's too hot for the current Japanese anemones. It struggles in the afternoon, late summer. I have a mature plant which I'm going to divide and locate into gentler locations. I need a replacement that will go with a mature buddleia and an apita that are thriving in this location. So you have to remember the buddleia is probably taking up quite a bit of moisture. The apita will grow virtually anywhere, so that is fine. So you need something that is in between the height of the buddleia and the apita. I fully understand that. Don't know what colours you want, so I would suggest trying something like Helianthus giganteus, which will give you good autumn colour. It sounds as though it gets really tall, but it doesn't get. It's only going to get up to somewhere about 1.50 m, which is about the same as your Japanese anemone. Beautiful, and it will tolerate a lot of harsh conditions. If that isn't the right colour for you, then perhaps try a Symphyotrichum, a Nova Anglii type, because that sounds as though that would go in those sorts of conditions. So those are two suggestions for that area. You also asked another question, and because you have said that you are loving our propagation course, I'm going to be kind and give you your second question as well. So you've pulled out a large Shasta daisy in that same area. It's flopping and not doing very well, and you're going to split it up and relocate it, and I think that's probably a very good idea to do so. You want something to go in its place. How about a hardy chrysanthemum? There are plenty of beautiful hardy chrysanthemums that you could get to go in that location, and they would do much better than the big leaf and the amount of base that you are getting on the leucanthemum. So go for a hardy chrysanthemum in that position. And also, just to add on there, move your Alchemilla mollis just slightly further back so it's out from where it's really hot and sunny. It will do a little bit better as well. Hello, is it a good time to move my Coreopsis? Mine is also in full sun and struggling. Okay, so if it's struggling and not looking happy, then absolutely move it now. It may be flowering, it doesn't matter. It's a struggling plant. Give it a little bit of a haircut, not too much, just take off the top bit of it, lift out a big clump with it, move it to a slightly shadier place, water it in, and you will then have a much happier plant. Thank you very much for watching, and please do subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch another video of mine, YouTube thinks this one is perfect for you.